Hello everyone and welcome back to my little art room, or welcome here for the first time. My name's Sam and I'm an artist and comic maker from the northwest of England, and in this video I wanted to share with you a little exercise that I really like to do, where I work through a number of pieces of media that I really like in order to find some really interesting patterns and connections between them that may not be obvious on the surface. So this is quite an in-depth tutorial where I really want to show you kind of how you go from the stuff that initially seems pretty obvious and jumps out at you, and how you can get to those really interesting, more in-depth connections that you might not think are there, but I can promise you they are. I want to set a challenge that I bet that even the most different pieces of media that you could put on the page, you will find some connection between them, and you may find a lot more than you expect. So I really hope you might give this a go, and I hope it's interesting for you. I think this is really helpful for creative people in order to, figure out what kind of things they enjoy in storytelling or in songwriting or in artistry, whatever your thing is, and it can help to inform your own work from there. But also it can just be a really fun self-discovery exercise. So if you're someone that just loves an exercise like that for your journal or whatever, then I think it's really fun for you to do this as well. And yeah, this is kind of harnessing artistic pattern recognition for the good of art. So I really hope you enjoy it and you might give it a go. And without further ado, let's get on with the tutorial. So part of the point of this exercise is to show you that these things can be very different and you can find the patterns within still. It's not about deliberately picking things that already feel somewhat similar. The point is that you could write anything down and I believe you could find some link between the things that you write. So I've just gone for 4 here to keep it somewhat simple because you'd be surprised how much detail you can find. I've gone for a few things that are pretty well known so that hopefully you might know at least 1 or 2 of these things on here. So just a quick run through. Bob's Burgers, the American animated series. Pretty wholesome, about a family working and owning a restaurant together with 3 young kids, lots of antics, lots of comedy. Ghost UK, just the UK version because that's the only one I'm really familiar with. A story about someone who inherits a very fancy house, big manor, off a relative she never knew she had. She then has an accident. This just happened really early on. It's not much of a spoiler. There will be some spoilers for these things in this explanation, so do be careful. And she ends up being able to see ghosts, so she can see all the ghosts in this old house, of which there are quite a few because it's a really old house. And then we've got Little Women, specifically the 2020 film because that's the version of it that I like the most. But this is a kind of coming of age story about a family living in America during and just after the American Civil War. It covers their lives for quite a period of time, and it's particularly about a group of sisters. So about 1860s America this is set. And then the 1982 sci-fi classic E.T., an alien that crash lands on Earth and a young boy who finds him, and he and his family and friends get him to safety. So just as a really obvious one to start with, the first thing that jumps out at me, because it's good to think about the things that just jump out immediately, I'm gonna say that combination of comedy with heart, so comedy with something poignant as well, because that's something Bob's Burgers does really well. It has some really poignant episodes, some really nice heartwarming moments, amongst what is also sometimes just comedy, lightheartedness. So immediately I can link that to the others. So I'm gonna do a solid line when something has a really strong link, and a kind of dotted line when it's a slightly less strong link. So for Ghosts, I think this is a really strong link. I'm just going to write first why. So this is primarily a comedy, but it really does have heart as well. And it has some really poignant episodes, sad backstories of the characters of the ghosts and things like that. And yeah, it is really heartwarming at times. So that has a really, really strong link. I could almost use the exact same description for those two in that sense. So I'm going to draw the really strong link. The way I've laid this out, I'm sure someone who's better at organising things or journaling or whatever could think of a better way to do this. I couldn't think how to do it. With Little Women, I wouldn't say Little Women is an outright comedy,
but it is quite light-hearted and heartwarming, and it has comedic moments. So while I'm not describing it exactly the same, it definitely still does have a link here, and it definitely has poignancy and emotion as well, and we got the heartwarming again. I'm going to say that this is maybe a slightly less strong link. So we're going to go for the slightly more dotted line. But it's still very much there. Because I do think that really does offer both sides of these things. Like, it's not a very heavy period drama. It's not really bleak. It's actually pretty heartwarming and enjoyable and lighthearted. Again, E.T. I would say it's comedic. I wouldn't say it's full-on comedy, because I would say it's more of an adventure, but it definitely has a lot of comedic moments. You know, there's moments with E.T. dressing up and all the antics and stuff. And it's still very heartwarming and sweet. I wouldn't say it's always particularly like hard-hitting, but it definitely has sweet moments. So I would say that's a pretty... I can almost not decide whether to do the full-on, so I'm doing a slight bit of both there. This is me when I try and do a system, and I'm really bad at it. So we've got a pretty decent link there. So I'm also keeping a little list here of things that, like, of the patterns that I find that really stick out. So again, this is quite a simple one that we found from the beginning. This combination of comedy and lightheartedness with heart and emotion, poignant moments, and the word heartwarming came up quite a lot as well. So you can also like highlight. It's interesting to see what words you find yourself writing in almost every category. So you can see that I actually ended up writing the word heartwarming in every single one, which is quite interesting. So that word definitely came up in all these cases. So I'm going to write that down as well. Heartwarming. So the next one, we're going to go a little bit more complex now. So something that's really key to Bob's Burgers is family. It's very much about a family. But also within that, we've got a lot of like sibling dynamics, bickering, etc. We've also got like the challenges, ups and downs. One thing I really like about Bob's Burgers is it's very much about family that love each other. They really care and love about each other. Because like there's some pieces of media that are about families, but it's very much more focused on the challenge of families or a really difficult family situation or whatever. This piece of media is not doing that. It's about a family that really does love each other and care about each other, even if, you know, they don't always get along. So family is very key there. Now let's go through our list again. Ghosts very much does have family, but it's more in a found family sense. Now I know about myself already, I really love found family. I have a real soft spot for it. And again, there actually are a lot of sibling dynamics between the ghosts. But again, they have a real genuine care and love despite their arguments, because they do argue a lot. Also, actually, the main character of Alison, like she... If I remember rightly, she was an orphan and she never had like a family, and so it was kind of her way of finding family as well, which was really nice. So obviously in Little Women, family is really key. It's really the whole point of this, and the sibling dynamics as well. And very much focused on sisterhood here. And really looking out for each other. Again, I'm going to write it again. Genuine care and love. They love each other so much, again, despite difficulties and arguments. You know, there's some really, really big arguments in Little Women between the siblings, but they really do love each other. Apart from that. And then also I do just want to add here a note that we do have found family too, I feel, in terms of Laurie. Because if you don't know, Laurie is a character who he's not related to the family, but he's quite isolated. He doesn't have any family. He's an only child, and I believe he lives with his granddad, if I remember rightly. And so when he's brought into this family of these sisters, I think, you know, it's really much a found family for him as well, and they really like bring him into the fold, and it's really lovely. So there's actually both in that one. And then E.T., I would say it's definitely more in that found family category, even though there is also the family helping Elliot to help E.T. But E.T. and Elliot's relationship is so close and has that family like level feeling, and that connection. And again, love and care. They really do love and care about each other. It's really like a very strong connection that Elliot forms with this alien, and it's very sweet. So again, we found some really strong links there. So I'm gonna draw the line. Sorry, I did the line as I was going last time, but let's do it this way now. So family, again, I think a very strong link between all of them here for family, actually. I don't feel like any of these pieces of media hasn't got a very core element of family. And I would say, like, for example, Little Women and Bob's Burgers is literally very much about family at the actual heart of their story. And even Ghosts, I would say, it's pretty much at the heart of it. And we're going to highlight again some of the things that came up. So I do think found family is something I've identified before that I really, really love to see. Also, interestingly, like, sibling dynamics came up quite a lot, which is quite interesting for me because I'm actually an only child. So I don't often feel much like I can relate to that very much in series. But yeah, I enjoy watching it. And again, genuine care and love really, really came up. So we're going to put on the patterns list. Whoops. We're going to put family and found family with genuine care and love. And I think also that's despite realistic difficulties, because even families that care about each other, you know, argue. And all of these are good examples of, you know, exploring the ups and downs. You know, there's a lot of bickering in Bob's Burgers, there's a lot of arguments in Ghost, a lot of arguments in Little Women. E.T.'s maybe there's not too many arguments, but, like, you know, it kind of shows the challenges. With E.T. you'd maybe say the challenge is that, you know, they're an alien and a human, and that difference. And even there's, actually, I've noticed a bit of a thing of siblings, which is interesting. So that's family. Now, let's go over something a bit more to do with the actual making of the series. So I'm going to go actually to Little Women for a minute, because, again, what you can do is think about something that you particularly like about one of these things and start with that one as the starting point. So the first two I kind of started with Bob's Burgers, but now I'm going to start with Little Women. So for this one, I'm going to do about the visuals, because Little Women, I think, is really visually beautiful. The cinematography, you know, whatever you'd call it, filmography, is all really lovely. There's a lot of attention to detail. The setting, it's got quite a nostalgic vibe. And like the costume design is really like characterful. If you've watched Little Women or you go on to watch it, like, I really like how each person's like character really comes through in the way they're costumed, and there's different colours that are actually like attributed to each character and things like that. For example, you see like I can't think of all their names. But like Joe is often in quite like earthy colours, and then, oh my goodness, Amy is often in like pale blue colours, pastel blue, you know, things like that. And they all have kind of their own colours, which is really nice. And I feel that there's a real warmth to it as well. That's something I really want to point out. And like quite a lot of like warm colours, which kind of links to this sense of nostalgia as well. So if we think about E.T., you know, you might not think of E.T. as like visually beautiful in that sense, but it's very visually fantastic. It's by a very like, obviously, it's by Spielberg, a very like influential filmmaker. So there's some shots in E.T. that are just so iconic. And it has that 80s warm saturation as well. And it has nostalgia, maybe not like, because in a sense it's now older, you know, maybe that's been created, but it does really have that warmth, again, in a different way to what it has when it has it here. But it's really quite iconic in its visuals. And then we've got And again, very characterful design. You know, everyone's personality is really there in the way they dress and the way that they make AT look and everything. So let's try and connect it with the other two. Can we connect it? Because again, part of this exercise is sometimes we might not be able to connect it. But if we go to Ghosts now, I would say Ghosts is not the kind of show that's actually really trying to be visually amazing. But what I would say is that it is quite visually warm and comforting. You've got this iconic house that kind of centres the whole thing, that feels, again, very characterful. Very characterful. And here also, I would say the costuming is so important and linked to these characters. Because, again, if you don't know in Ghosts, every single character, their costume of the ghosts, all the costumes that they wear all stay the same. So like it is their look, and it really kind of is a sign of who they are. So because you know, each person is from a different era of time, so you've got, you know, literally, for example, you've got a guy who was like a scout leader still wearing his scout uniform, with, you know, the necktie and everything. But they also even have, you know, some of them, the way that they've died is shown in their like costuming. For example, he has like the arrow through his neck, and you know, and then you've got people in Regency era clothing and all that kind of thing, you know. So the costuming is really, really important to almost instantly tell us who these characters are, where they're from, you know, what kind of character they are. So that's where I feel we've got this link here, is actually we're finding a link within a link. And this is where this, to me, starts to get really interesting, is when you notice the smaller patterns within the bigger things. So another thing here, I think we've got this again in Bob's Burgers. So again, we've got, again, a very quite visually comforting show. You know, it's got a familiarity, it stays the same. The animation is quite simple and warm, and again we've got quite bright warm colours, and again, like, characters always look the same, so they have like iconic outfits and things like that. So again, very characterful design that speaks to their personality. So what I mean by this is, like, for example, you might do this about things that you love, and you might be really into like some of those really like hard-hitting dramas, for example. But you might find yourself thinking that, like, in things like that, people are kind of just wearing pretty ordinary clothing, or not really things that maybe directly speak to their personalities or their characters. Or for example, you know, I think about this, if you watch something that's set in anything where people are wearing a uniform or something, again, that can kind of flatten the opportunity for this, because if predominantly something always has you know, a uniform, it's like, how do you speak to that person's character? Or are there still things that speak to it, like little nods to it? They might wear a badge on their uniform that's different, or they might wear different coloured shoes or something like that, you know, to set them apart. So it isn't, you know, all these things. You might at first think, oh, well, that's in everything, but it isn't actually. You know, this kind of character design where it's really, really, really linked to these people as characters is not actually how everybody goes about making, you know, a show or a film or a comic or anything. So yeah, let's look at the link there. So, again, I'm going to look for the link within the link here. So I think some really key ones there. Let's do our line as well. If I can get a pencil. So we started off with Little Women, so just for the sake of it, we're going to go from there. So we did there to there. Again, I think these are all really strong links, actually. We've got a really strong link there. I would say, fair enough, the link to Ghosts in general, just for visuals, is a little bit weaker. However, I think the costuming thing is really strong. Again, I don't think that Bob's Burgers is really visually, like, beautiful or anything, but I do think it's very strong in character, like I say. So I would say they're the strongest link on this one, but the costuming thing is a very, very strong link apart from that. So I'm going to go here and look at some of the links. So one thing I noticed was I mentioned visually warm a lot. Warm was a word that came up a lot. And again, I know this about myself already. It's validating it again. I love warm colours. You know, I love that kind of 80s cranked up saturation that we used to have. Warm colours, nostalgic. Warm saturation, nostalgia, warmth. And then something, again, I've really highlighted is characterful design in costuming, for example. And also in environments, you know. So, like, you know, are people's belongings out in the environment, or do we never get to see that? And again, that can take away from personality. So yeah, I think those are the two kind of main things there. You know, comforting, and I mean, again, attention to detail is quite an important thing, because that kind of speaks to these things being there. The fact that there's a lot of attention to detail has created the strength of character. So we're gonna write visually warm colours, deep saturation, and I'm also gonna put characterful costuming and design, environments, etc. You know, costuming and things like that really speak to characters' personalities. So I'm going to put strong personality actually as well. And then we're going to do just two more. So again, if you want to go like even further, this is going to be an example of something that's maybe even more like complex and deeper into the stories that you're looking at. We're going to talk a bit about characters. So we're going to start with Little Women here. So this is just one part of the characters here, because as I was making this, I realised there was actually so much more I could have done just on these 4 things. It's actually amazing when you sit down to do this, how much you can find. Once you start thinking about it, more and more will start flowing into your mind, and you'd be really surprised. That's why I would recommend you really do know the things you do this exercise on really well, so that you can really get in depth about why you like them. So the characters. Something that I thought about some of the characters, I was thinking about Jo, who's my favourite character in Little Women. So again, you could ask yourself, like, what's my favourite character? You could even do this whole exercise just on characters. You know, that would be a really cool way to do it, without even thinking about the whole story. So, for example, I phrase this as, like, characters who feel different, or what I actually got to in the end was, for a bit of noting down, was, like, characters who want a different path in life. So I would say people who feel like at odds with society, like general society, especially if you think about this being set obviously back in the past, and how like they would have been in a time like even more restricted in how they could have, you know, lived life and things. So want a different path in life. Unusual maybe to society, etc. And then we're also going to say they usually have challenges to this too, or that outright stopped from doing it. So you can see already this is quite a lot more complex, it's quite a lot more in depth. We're talking here about like an aspect of Jo's character that's quite complex to explain. But Jo's very much someone who, you know, she feels very different to her family, to society. She, you know, doesn't, you know, she wants more than, well, it's not, you know what I mean, she wants a different life to the path that, you know, people have tended to go down, where they get married, they have kids. She wants to write, she wants to do different things, you know. And so when I thought about it, I tried to think about where I found these characters in the other series. So for example, with Ghosts, there's a couple of characters that I think really feel this way. And one of them is the captain. So the captain was actually like in the army in, I believe, the Second World War. But he was, again, this is something we hear more about in a backstory, so again, I'm not trying to ruin it, but it does involve talking about these things in depth when you're trying to do something like this. And he really, like, he struggled to fit in with that environment. And he was also a closeted gay man. He actually, in the series, he doesn't, like, it's really known, but he actually doesn't ever really say this. But it's very, very, you know, known, if you know what I mean. But it's very much, you know, he had to hide who he was. He didn't feel he could be himself, you know. So again, you can see how there's some similarities there between this character and Joe, in the sense that he was different to how common society would have wanted people to be, and he felt that he couldn't be himself, and he had too many challenges to who he truly wanted to be. So that's why I think there's that link there. And also we get a bit of a backstory at one point about Lady Button, who is like a very dour, like who's actually like the great grandmother of the main character, of the alive human in the story. But like, she also, we find out, like wanted an education, wanted a different path in life, but she was forced to marry. And then her story was quite sad. Like, her husband was awful and ended up shoving her out a window. So she was forced into a life she didn't want. And it's quite sad, really, because part of her joke in the series is that she's quite like conservative and like this is the way things should be. She's more like quite prim and proper is what I'm saying. But you kind of get this backstory that maybe she actually didn't want that, but she was kind of forced into a life she didn't want, and that had to become her life, like being a lady of the house. So again, I think that we've got this link here of wanting a different path, and society and the societal pressure not to do that, of very intense levels depending on what was going on. I would say at a different level, again a bit more freed with like a modern setting here, we would have Louise, who links to this, because to me Louise, like again, is quite different, wants different things. I think for Louise, it's maybe like she's a bit different to what you might call typical girls. Now again, there isn't so much such a thing as a typical girl, but I feel like she struggles with femininity, and relating to her peers who are also women, you know. I've definitely not spelled femininity right. But you know, she's quite like a kind of bold character that wants different things, and she gets frustrated sometimes by like the limitations of like prejudices around gender, you know, like people saying you can't do this, you can't do that. So again, I think she's the kind of person who wants like quite a unique life. She doesn't want to go down any path that anyone sets for her. She wants freedom to do what she wants. And E.T. is maybe one that's hard to link to this. I would argue that maybe like we've got a more literal alien here. So someone who is literally very different. That's probably the only link I can think of, but the link's pretty tenuous there. So that's an example of where I think it's harder to link that together. You maybe could think about, I don't know, Elliot connecting with the alien, kind of perhaps he wasn't able to connect with people as much, I don't know, but I feel like I'd have to rewatch that one and really think about that deeply to know if I can link that together. So I'm going to say that this is a pretty weak link to this one. But I would say we've got I think there's a pretty strong link to Ghost here. So I'm gonna put a pretty strong link there. I'm just gonna draw a few more so we can really see the green. And then I would say the link to Louise is pretty strong as well, because I think Louise is quite a symbol of that as well. And let's look at some of the things that came up. So I think it's about freedom and living as you want to do. Again, this thing about a path in life, what they wanted to do, different paths, and against that societal pressure and the struggle. And again, different, at odds with society, path in life, and the challenges as well. So what I'm going to write down is like characters who want to be themselves and be free to do that, and follow their own potentially quite different path in life. I'm just going to put different in quotes. Their own path in life despite and sometimes against challenges, because we've got examples here where they literally couldn't do it. Like with ghosts, they have been unable to fight those challenges, whereas in Little Women she partly did, and in Bob's Burgers she did as well. But Little Women's a bit complicated on this subject actually, especially if you've read the book. There is a sense of Jo's character being almost like forced to conform at the end of this, which is interesting and too big of a thing to talk about right this minute. But yeah, so you can see how you can get really into a more in-depth topic and again unveil some some points that are maybe more specific. The final one I wanted to write down that I feel like will kind of bring us back to the beginning, because it's actually linked to this beginning, but again it's going a bit deeper on this subject, is having to say goodbye. That's something that I thought is just so key in some of these, is a moment of having to say goodbye. And I would say like a bittersweetness, a sadness, and even a grounding in reality, because I actually really like stuff. Again, it comes back to this thing of I actually really like stuff that has a reality to it, like it doesn't shy away from some of the harsh sides of reality, and even so far as like loss as well. So yeah, at the end of E.T. obviously they have to say goodbye. E.T. goes back home and Elliot is really devastated. He even asks him to stay. And so it's a very, very key moment of the film that, it's quite heartbreaking actually. And in Little Women, this is a big spoiler that you may not want, but you all know what I'm going to say. Beth. Very, very sad. Incredibly, incredibly hard thing for them to lose such a person in their family. And it's also kind of all sides of it, the lead up as well and after. So it's like we see all sides of it. We see before Beth passes away, we see her passing away, and we see quite a long time after as well. And it is really bittersweet, and it's the harshness of reality, which I like that people don't shy away from that, even if it can be very sad, because the overall feeling of a lot of these is still very hopeful, even if there are really sad moments. And again, with ghosts, we actually have this in kind of two ways. We have the ghosts moving on. This actually does happen once to a pretty significant character in this, and it's a really sad episode. It is like someone has passed away. There's a grief there, and a loss, and there's also stories about the ghosts' deaths as well. And some of the stories are really sad and really harsh, and there's some, pretty emotive episodes about the backstories, and about them grieving for their own lives, really, which is interesting. And then in Bob's Burgers, this is maybe the one with the least amount of this kind of thing. But I would say there is still some bittersweet moments. And one thing I did note, was that actually Bob has never, in the whole series, Bob's mum has already passed away when he was a child. And there are episodes that touch on this. And, like, the loss of that, and that they never met his family. I was actually just watching an episode the other day where they visit Bob's mum's grave, and there is something really sad about the fact that, his mum never got to meet his children, his wife, or anybody like that. So it's really, that is still touching on this issue of grief, of loss, of, not having that, of not having someone in your life that meant a lot to you. So to me, this kind of links back to this one at the beginning. We wrote down something that was really quite an overarching theme of like comedy with heart and emotion. And this is an example to me of where it does it, where we hit on some of these really bittersweet moments of life, of loss and grief. And that's one of the examples of where, it hits that like poignancy moment. So I think we've kind of brought ourselves full circle, which is really nice. So again, let's just do this for the final time, even though it's a terrible system. I think there's a pretty strong link here between E.T. and... where have I drawn it? Oops, I've gone too high up. E.T. and Little Women, definitely. There's a real having to say goodbye and a grief and loss in Little Women. I would also say that actually loss in Ghosts is a pretty common theme that comes up quite a lot. As I say, I think the most tenuous link is to Bob's Burgers. Oh, someone's going to go, no, you've made the system even more complex. So I'm just going to do a dotted line for that one, but it still is there. So if you're thinking all these ones I've done, I did about 5 different points there, but all of them I was able to find something that linked, you know, in every single piece of media. There wasn't actually one where I felt like it wasn't there at all. So that's really fascinating. So yeah, in all of them I found that sense of bittersweetness, loss, harsh realities, and yeah, like, again, reality, grief, loss, goodbye, bittersweet, loss came up a lot. So our final thing I'm going to put on the list is stories of loss, bittersweet moments or endings, having to say goodbye, reality, you know, and yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? And yeah, and it's quite profound, you know, when they do these things within a story like that. So yeah, that's what you might end up with doing this kind of exercise with only 4 things. So just shows you like how much you can get out of, you know, just one go at this exercise. And you can do this with all kinds of things. You can do loads and loads of comparisons. You can do really niche things, really big things. I hope you have fun with it, and I hope it made some sense. So yeah, and it's interesting, you might have noticed that even though I'm a comic artist, I didn't actually mention like a comic or a manga or anything. And it's partly because sometimes I think it's good to like get some distance from the thing that you actually make, and you know, look at lots of different kinds of media, even if it feels really, really different to what you actually create as an artist. But yeah, I think this exercise is really, really adaptable to all kinds of different things. You know, you could do this about just characters. You could do it about albums that you really like. Obviously, the things that would connect them would be really different. Perhaps it would be about mood or emotion or lyricism, all that kind of thing. You know, you could do this on really, really niche forms of media. You know, really, you could actually deliberately choose some things that are really similar and really challenge yourself to find like even more in-depth things that link them together. Or like I say, you could choose things that are really, really different, that you might think there's no way I can find a link between those, but I bet if you gave it a go, you could find something that linked them together. So I just think it's a really valuable exercise. And I'm not saying I invented this. I feel like it's not the kind of thing you can invent. It's really just sitting down and really thinking about it. But I just think it's a really helpful thing that I've done many, many times over the years. And I kind of just wanted to show how I kind of went through it in that step by step of, I think the really important thing is to start with the things that just really immediately seem obvious, like that come to you initially. Get those out first, and then you go past that and you go deeper into the different layers. So yeah, I hope this was helpful and maybe just a fun thing you can have a go at. It's something you can do time and time again on so many different subjects, and I think it's really interesting. So thanks for watching, and please do let me know if you give it a go or like what kind of subjects you might want to try this on. I'll be really fascinated to hear. So yeah, thank you so much, and I hope this could be helpful to you, and best of luck if you give the exercise a try. Goodbye.